So I hope you're all thinking of good questions to ask, because I'm excited to enjoy this dialogue. But first things first, we have to round the whole day with what would this look like in an actual community place? How would we create a center around this? And this is what Amanda is going to talk to us about. Amanda is an internationally recognized cannabis expert and public health researcher, dubbed the brain by L.com, so that's fantastic there. Dr. Reiman is the leader in the field of cannabis as a substitute for alcohol and other drugs, and has presented her research all over the world. Also an expert in cannabis policy on the local, national, and international level, Dr. Reiman was the first chairwoman of the Berkeley Medical Cannabis Commission and currently sits on the Oakland Cannabis Regulatory Commission. After receiving her PhD from UC Berkeley, Dr. Reiman was the Director of Research and Patient Services at Berkeley Patients Group, one of the oldest dispensaries in the country, and the manager of the Marijuana Law and Policy for the Drug Policy Alliance, a national nonprofit that was engaged in the drafting and campaigns of legalization initiatives across the country. She has lots more, but I think she'll explain it as well. So just one more paragraph, so I'll be quick, man. Dr. Reiman is currently a lecturer at the School of Social Welfare at UC Berkeley, that's an important thing, and an affiliate scientist with the Alcohol Research Group. She also conducts research through her Research Triangle International. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Everyone hear me? I'm pretty loud. Everyone good? We're good? Okay. Thank you so much for having me. This is my favorite type of place to talk because I love intimate groups and I love back and forth. So I'm not going to talk too long because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for really good discussion. I think the speakers so far tonight have kind of laid this landscape out for us all, right? Is that we have this opportunity. We have cannabis, which is this amazing plant which has all of this healing potential, this potential for societal change, both on the individual level, the community level, and now we have it more accessible than it ever has been in recent history. So what does that mean for realizing the potential that we've laid out tonight? Like, how do we get to the place where we don't see cannabis go the way of alcohol with the party atmosphere and the let's see how high we can get, and instead see cannabis go down the way of a sacred plant that people can use mindfully in order to really change their perception, open their hearts, and really go on this spiritual path that we all think that cannabis has the potential to do. We are at a crossroads now because we have enough states that have legalized. We have 8 states that have adult use. We have 28 states that have medical use. We have people that are coming out of the woodwork to use cannabis, as Indigo said, who haven't used it in decades, maybe even at all. So I look at us, folks in San Francisco, the Bay Area, California, other progressive places that have moved forward with their cannabis policies. We become like ambassadors for the culture that we want to see 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line. And there's a lot of talk about what that looks like in terms of the cannabis industry. But here tonight, I'm talking more about what that looks like from the side of the cannabis consumer and what our responsibility is to others to bring this plant to them in a way that's mindful, in a way where they're going to maximize the benefits of this plant. As was said, I teach at UC Berkeley. My students are usually in their early 20s. They're from Berkeley. A lot of them have already used pot. But one of the things I tell them is that this is a plant that you're going to want to have a relationship with the rest of your life. Like when you're 90, 95, 100 years old, you're going to want to be able to reach for that cannabis product and have it work for you in your life. And if you go overboard with trying to get yourself as high as you can possibly get before you're 25, you're putting that relationship in jeopardy. And believe me, you don't want to do that. You don't want to say, man, I can't use pot anymore because I used so much one time that I never went back to it again. We don't want that to happen. We want people to say, I had really good experiences. And believe me, if we can create that reality, if we can create that setting, we will do so much for pushing policy forward in states where prohibition really is alive and well. So that's what I want to focus on tonight, is why is it important to help people learn how to use cannabis and help them do it in an environment that's supportive, that's going to create that culture, and how that is then going to get us what we want in terms of watching marijuana prohibition fall in other places. So I did bring a little help tonight from Howard Becker's Outsiders, Studies in the Sociology of Deviance. If you have not seen this book, it is fantastic. It is from 1963. They just did a reissue of it last year, and I was very blessed to get to write a commentary for the reissue on this very chapter, which is about learning how to use marijuana. So Becker noticed that he would talk to folks about marijuana, and they would say, you know, I didn't get high the first time I used marijuana. You know, it took me like 3 or 4 times using it before I really knew what it was about. And he heard this again and again, so what he decided to do was a research study where he interviewed 50 people who had used cannabis about their first time and to see if he could draw any conclusions. And what he found out is that, like other drugs, cannabis is a social learning process. Now, I want us all to think back to when we first tried alcohol. Now, let me tell you, when I was in high school and I was first using alcohol, the culture in which I was using it was not healthy at all. We were getting cheap alcohol. We were drinking it as fast as we possibly could. We were hiding while we were doing it because we weren't allowed to do it. We were mixing things that were making us sick. We were drinking too much, too fast. I mean, we were putting tubes down our throats with cones and pouring whole beers down there. I mean, that is not a safe way to use alcohol. But that was the culture, right? And then when I moved to California and I saw wine and I kind of understood more about grapes and hops as an agricultural crop, it really changed the way I viewed alcohol. And so I'm seeing things happen in some of the legal states, and I'm not going to name names, but there is a culture that is evolving. I call it the cannabis spring break culture, where tourists come, they get on a bus, they go from shop to shop, they use on the bus, and then they're dropped off at their hotel at the end of the night. And some of these folks may be the I haven't used cannabis since 1972. So this is what Howard Becker had to say about the social learning process of cannabis, and this is why it's so important that we impart this process and become good stewards to the cannabis plant. So according to Becker, there's 3 parts of learning how to become high. First is actually learning the technique. So like Bill Clinton, I never inhaled. Maybe he really didn't. I mean, maybe he didn't really know what you were supposed to do and no one really told him. So Becker says the novice does not ordinarily get high the first time he smokes marijuana, and several attempts are usually necessary to induce this state. One explanation of this may be that the drug is not smoked properly. That is, in a way that ensures sufficient dosage to produce real symptoms of intoxication. So this has changed a bit because we have like dab rigs and bongs and all these things, but when people would just smoke joints and they look like a cigarette, right, some people wouldn't hold it in long enough, they wouldn't really suck in properly, and so they actually really wouldn't get high. But let's say they learned how to do that, right? So they learned how to get the marijuana in them. The second part is learning to perceive the effects. So even after he learns the proper smoking technique, the new user may not get high, and thus not form a conception of the drug as something which can be used for pleasure. So it's actually not only learning how to take it in, but learning to perceive that you're feeling different. So people in this study would talk about their friend who insisted they weren't high, even though they were totally high. You may have had people like this in your life. Because they hadn't yet learned to perceive that effect as equating it to being high. So let's say you learn how to do it, you perceive you're having an effect. What is the third stage is learning to enjoy the effects. Now, a lot of people just cast this one off. They're like, well, you've learned how to do it now, you've learned that you're high, of course you're going to enjoy it, it's fantastic. But let's think about that. One more step is necessary if the user who has now learned to get high is to continue use. He must learn to enjoy the effects he has just learned to experience. Marijuana-produced sensations are not automatically or necessarily pleasurable. The taste for such experience is a socially acquired one, not different from the kind of acquired taste for oysters or dry martinis. The user feels dizzy, thirsty, his scalp tingles, he misjudges time and distance. Are these things pleasurable? He isn't sure. If he is to continue marijuana use, he must decide that they are. Otherwise, getting high, while a real enough experience, will be an unpleasant one he would rather avoid. So that's how we learn to get high. So where do we fit into all of this, right? So where's our role? Our role is to help people initiate into cannabis use in a way that's healthy. Our role is to talk about cannabis not as, oh, it's just a substitute for alcohol, but that it's a tool. It's a tool that people can use for mindfulness. It's a tool that people can use to open their hearts, open their souls, all of the things that the other speakers were talking about. So we can do that by creating environments where this can happen. And I think that the early dispensaries of San Francisco were an amazing example. I did my doctoral dissertation research in 2005 on how medical cannabis dispensaries were operating as health service providers. And as part of that, I went and sat in all the dispensaries that used to be over here, like on Divisadero, and the millions that used to be up and down Haight, like the Vapor Room and Alternative Healthcare and all of those. And I would give patients surveys, and what I would notice is that they were teaching each other that cannabis was medicine. They were teaching each other that this wasn't just about getting high anymore, that there was an intention, and there was something you could do during the process of ingesting cannabis that would actually give you this amazing benefit besides just the pain relief, right? Besides just the appetite. There was something bigger than that that can be gathered from cannabis. So I think that it's important as we move forward to remember that we're going to have people coming from all over the world to places like California, where we now have legal markets, to experience this. And they're going to come here maybe never using cannabis, maybe using cannabis once or twice, or not having used it for decades. And they're going to want to know the things that we're asking the bud tenders, but they're also going to need places and environments in order to help them experience cannabis to the fullest. So I think it's important to talk about public consumption centers in cities. We're talking about that in Oakland right now. I think it's important to talk about retreats and places where people can go not only to experience cannabis, but to learn about how it's grown. I mean, I can't imagine, there are so many people out there that have been using cannabis for decades and have never seen it outside of a little baggie. Right? They've never walked up to a cannabis plant in the ground and put it in their hand and smelled it, and experienced how that compares to other plants, and to see that it's an agricultural crop just like other agricultural crops. We have to expose people to this if we're really going to get the most out of the fact that cannabis is legal. Now there's another very important reason, and that is the fact that these folks are going to go back to the states and the cities that they're from, and they're going to say one of two things. They're either going to say, oh my gosh, we have to get this here. Like, why don't we have this in Georgia? Why don't we have this in Arkansas? Why don't we have this in North Carolina? I had the most amazing experience. It really was something we had, and I don't understand why it's prohibited. I'm calling my legislator right now, and we're going to get this conversation going. That can happen, or they can go back and say, okay, now I know why this drug is illegal. I got so sick, I got so scared, I had a really bad time, and believe me, if this ever comes up for vote where I live, I'm voting no. And you know who can help make that decision? We can, because we get it. So if we can be the ambassadors that we know, and the effect that cannabis we know can have on society, it can change the world. Like all of these changes, these things we're talking about, that can happen, but it starts with us. So let's all be great ambassadors. Let's remember and renew our commitment to the spirituality and importance of this plant, and then let's get out there and spread the word. Thank you.